Hey, hockey fans, welcome to the 7-Eleven Overtime Podcast. I'm Gino Reda. You know, I've spent over 4 decades working in the game, fortunate enough to meet some of the legends of the game, saw them come into the league, watched them shine in the game. Now they've moved on to life after the game. The 7-Eleven Overtime Podcast gives us a chance to catch up, tell some great stories, relive some great memories, and hear what they're up to today. Today's legend, he was a second overall pick in the 1978 draft, 15-year NHL veteran, over 1,000 games. He played with the Caps, the Habs, the Canucks. He won a Stanley Cup with the Montreal Canadians. At one point, he was youngest captain in NHL history. Post-career, he went on to coach in the NHL, led our Canadian national women's team for a while, spent over 9 years on air as one of the brethren in broadcasting, as well as 3 seasons as the president of the Abbostford Heat of the American Hockey League. On top of all that, he's an accomplished motivational speaker, an author, a leadership expert. So pleased to be joined by my buddy, Ryan Walter. Ryan, how are you, pal?
Gino, good, buddy. Good to see you again.
It's good to see you. I was just saying before we started recording that you and I bump into each other on a professional basis a lot, like at different events. Yeah. You're speaking at something or you're appearing at something, but we don't really get a chance to connect because we're both doing what we're supposed to be doing. So this is going to be a lot of fun to actually talk and see how you're doing personally, which is going to be great.
Yeah, it's great to catch up. And you know, it's funny, you and I have been doing what we're doing for a long time now. Like, I remember way back. I mean, it was so fun, you know, from a playing point of view, a broadcasting point of view. It was always great to bump into you.
Yeah, it is fun. The difference between the backdrop that you have is the jerseys you wore. The backdrop I have it, the jerseys that buddies of mine have given me over the years. That's the major difference, right?
Well, I'm very thankful, Gino. I finally had, my wife Jenny and I did a little work getting all of those jerseys put together. It was really, from my career, it was really the one thing that I was hoping, you know, to get up on the wall was team has been such an important part of my life in our lives that, you know, it's fun. I don't need trophies up there. I don't need anything else. It's just that reminder. It's funny when you look at a jersey, you remember the people.
Yeah. Can I talk about one person that you got a chance to? It's funny because you're my age. We're similar in age. We're kind of like the sandwich generation where we're taking care of our parents and our kids and our grandkids at exactly the same time. You were kind of like the sandwich generation in the NHL, where as you were coming in, Gordie Howe was just wrapping things up. So as well as the jerseys you got to wear, it's the people you got to meet along the way that were so unbelievably influential. Share that with our audience.
Yeah, that's a great. Thanks for taking me back. You know, it's interesting. I saw Gordie. You know, I got to spend some time with Gordie Howe back when I was a 19-year-old junior hockey player. And I don't know if people remember this, but the World Hockey Association was up and running, and they were trying to take away all the top picks. Yeah. So Hartford, so Gino, you're going to love these names. So Hartford flies me in because they're wanting me to sign with them in the world hockey instead of go to the NHL draft. Yeah. And so they sit me. They're playing games at the end of the season. They're in the playoffs, and they sit me at a pregame meal with Pye McKenzie, Dave Keon, and Gordie Howe. Come on. Now for some of the younger generation that are watching your show, you got to Google those 3 names, right?
But when you Google them, you know what happens is legends. Oh yeah, legends.
And so Gordie, you know, here's a great insight into Gordie. He's just an amazing guy. I love the way he always made everybody feel so comfortable off the ice, not on the ice, off the ice.
Because you got the elbow.
But you know, everybody else is back in the day, right? Having steak and, you know, pregame meal was a typical, you know, French fries, onion rings. And here's Gordie Howe, you know, I played against him at 52 the next year. Yeah. But at 51, you know, he's got a little bit of cottage cheese, he's got celery, he's got salad, and just a little tiny piece of chicken, right? No, you know, I'm a 19-year-old kid. You know, I'm not worried about what I eat, but I'm watching Gordie, right? Why was he the best of the best? he was, everything was done for a reason. And I love that about Gordie. One more story about Gordie Howe. Next year, I'm in Washington. I sign with the Capitals, and we're playing against Hartford. And of course, all those guys are there, right? Gordie's playing with his sons. And Bent Gustafson, great hockey player for us, he runs Marty Howe. Like Bent was a pretty tough Swede, right? Like he runs Marty Howe. And the next shift out, Gordie, even before the puck drops, Gordie goes after Bent and chases him around the ice like he's gonna beat on Bent Gustafson. Oh my goodness!
But
He's
Ryan,
just
the
an
big thing
amazing
about
guy.
him was he didn't do it just on image. Like, I mean, this. So just to clarify to our audience, a lot of today's hockey, superstars they're slim. They're not that
Yeah,
big. They don't spend a lot of time in the workout room. They don't, they don't do a lot of
yeah.
stuff in terms of building muscle mass. Gordie might have been one of the strongest players
Oh yeah,
I ever met. I mean, he had those freaking shoulders and his
yeah.
forearms and his hands. This guy was chiseled decades before anybody even knew what the word chiseled meant.
Yeah, and part of that, is, and people know this, is, we're in Edmonton to do a gig tomorrow, and so I think of the prairies, and here's Gordie, out on the prairies, like working, like all summer. So you mentioned that we might be the sandwich, the people, the players in the middle, and I think that's a good example. I think I read somewhere that Gordie made 5K for a season,
Yeah.
and often had to work in the summer.
Yeah.
So and I remember thinking as a kid, I signed in Washington. That first year, I made $25,000 as a signing bonus, and like I was going 25. You're kidding, like things
Exactly.
have changed a little bit,
Yeah. You know what else has changed is the leadership thing. You were a guy ahead of your time. I mean, for people who followed your career, they famously knew that you got named as the captain of the Caps. They drafted you second overall back in '78, which at that point, now it's not that big a deal. Hughes has got the C. Connor McDavid got the C when he was really
Yeah.
young. It's not uncommon to see a young guy get the C. In your age, the young guy, no one gave a rat's butt where you got drafted. You sit in the corner, you be quiet, and you listen to the veterans. For them to hand you the C, to me, was the very, very first indication I ever got about the kind of leader that you clearly were. What did that mean to you when that happened? Because that was completely out of the norm back then.
It was, yeah, really good point. And I think the first thing that most of us, as whether we're leaders or we don't feel like we're leaders, I think the first thing is not me. like don't give me all that responsibility. I actually had been a captain in Seattle in the Western Hockey League before I was drafted, and then I was captain of the World Juniors. And so I had a feel, of the pressure of, and maybe a little bit of how to hold myself and stuff. I think the reason the Capitals, I've never asked Max McNabb, and he passed way too early. Wonderful guy, our GM. But I think one of the reasons that the Capitals, felt that I should wear the C at that point was maybe a little bit more over values, right? Like I sort of shared the values that the organization was hoping, to become, and we were a young team under struggling to put wins together. So I think part of that was I was not the tough guy on the team, and I am not a tough guy, but growing up in the Dub, you sort of had to learn how to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
So we'd go into Philly, and if somebody came my way, I'm not going to win the fight, but I'm not going to back down. I think that's what they were looking for, right? Is a compete level that would sort of set an example. So I messed up. Oh my goodness. You look back in your life, I can remember, I've messed up so much being a young captain. And here's what I wish I would have had. And this takes us maybe into where we're at today, is I wish I would have had a mentor that had been there before me and could jump on a phone call or two or a Zoom call and just be available, right?
Yeah.
Because I needed to run some things off of people, But and I had great teammates. So Guy Charon was awesome. I loved him, and I talked to Mike Gardner often. But I needed somebody that had an understanding of leadership at the time in that culture that could be my mentor.
Which brings me to a guy that I think maybe you don't consider a mentor, but I think he had a pretty impactful role in your life. A combination of a lot of turbulence in an airplane and Jean Provo, who at that point was wrapping up his career with the Caps as you were coming in. He was one of those veterans in the room. Tell me about the combination of those two and the impact that they had in your life.
Yeah, that's a great combination. Jean Pronovo, I didn't really know Jean. Like, what a player! Like, if you just go back and look at his stats and his time in Pittsburgh.
I think four times a 40-plus goal scorer, right?
Right? Like, crazy years. Do you know what I really appreciated about Prony? And he was at the end of his time in Wash, and we were, Mike Gardner, myself, others, we were at the beginning of our time. We were just starting off. But what I loved about Jean was his intense love for his wife Deanne, and his intense love for his family. Right, you can't miss those things.
And he was a real man of faith too, right?
Oh, totally. And I think that's what sort of brought me to the place of when the plane, we were on a funny plane that sort of hit a couple of air pockets, and the first one everybody sort of quiet, and the second one, all the big guys on our team are screaming out the name of Jesus, right? Like, we're going down. Yeah. And for the first time in their lives, it's not a swear word, right? Like, it's reality. So I got off that plane, and I went to Jean, and that's my point. Like, when you want to go to somebody that's real, and I said, Prony, if the plane goes down, do I go up? Right? Like,
that's a good question. That seems like the appropriate question at that point.
Totally. And Jean was awesome. He had a big smile on his face. He threw me a New Testament. He said, I'm not going to tell you.
Wow.
He said, you go read for yourself, kid. And that was really, I'm a kid with a non-religious background, played hockey every Sunday morning. And so my introduction to, the New Testament was through Jean Pronovo. And Jean just became a friend then, and he was a resource for me from a faith point of view.
And it's interesting because you mentioned the Broad Street Bullies and how you couldn't back down on those guys. For the younger hockey fans, the Broad Street Bullies is where it was the most intimidating group of players probably in NHL history. Guys that you did not want to mess with. They would threaten you physically. They would come at you. The Bobby Clarks and Schultzes and all these guys. And it kind of had an impact. Your life experience at that point kind of had an impact when you came in contact with the Broad Street Bullies again down the road, didn't it?
Yeah, it sure did. It's funny. And players will try to get any edge possible, right?
Oh, yeah.
So intimidation is actually, back in the day, back in the 70s, was alive and well. And the Flyers, especially because the Capitals were going to play the Flyers so many times. I remember early in seasons, certainly the first season I played and the second, the Flyers would pretty much, I don't know if it was their plan, I'm sure it was, we'd have a bench clearing brawl. And that sort of set the scene. And then for the next 7 games, you're playing against the Flyers. A thing I love about intimidation, and I don't love it, but that I've learned about intimidation, Gino, is that it takes your mind off the game you should be playing. Right. Like all of a sudden now you're more concerned about, are we going to brawl tonight, than you are about, getting in the flow to play your best game. So I'd skeet by their bench. They were sweet. Clarkie and those guys were amazing. And instead of telling me to F off or whatever, they'd say, Walter, go read your Bible. Like, I thought it was an upgrade, actually. So
that's true.
But it was interesting, Gino, from a faith point of view, and this is just, me as a Christian athlete, that I never started off my career thinking that was going to happen. I'm so thankful it did. But, I didn't understand how people all of a sudden knew. right? Like I thought, oh yeah, this
That's
is
a good
fine. This is
point.
this is a personal faith, right?
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden, like boom, it's broadcasted across the NHL, and it is what it is, right?
Yeah.
You live your life.
You had some great moments, and we're going to get to that. Obviously, at the Cup with the Montreal Canadiens, and you know, being a roommate with Guy Lafleur and stuff like that. But the transition to that wasn't exactly the smoothest. Red Fisher, Red Fisher, hockey journalist, legend hockey journalist with the
Yeah.
Montreal for about 600 years. I think he was writing. It was back in
Yeah.
September of 1982. You're part of a blockbuster trade. Rick Green and yourself go to Montreal in exchange for Brian Engblom, Doug Jarvis, Rod Langway, and Craig Laughlin. This is what Red Fisher says. The headline in the Montreal Gazette the next day, and this is talking about the deal that you're going to Montreal, the
Yeah.
worst trade in NHL history. What
Yeah.
was that like as a welcome to Montreal moment for Ryan Walter?
Yeah. Yeah. What a reminder. You're a young kid. I'm early 20s. I got lots of maturing to do. And that was a grow up time. That was a grow up time. I mean, I literally underperformed for the first part of that season. I love talking to young leaders about this because so many people, and I'm not excluded from this, but we have a tendency to live our headlines, right? Like, and often that's not
Great
our
quote,
headline,
way to go, Ryan.
right?
That's a great quote.
Yeah. Well, we do though. I lived through that, and it wasn't necessarily what I believed of myself. It was what somebody else was putting on me. So, bless his heart. I love Red, and we became friends for many years. But worst trade in NHL history, defined the game I played for that next month. And then, it's fun. It was just fun in Montreal only because it had so many amazing players and assets that you could talk to. You mentioned, Guy Lafleur became my roommate at the first part of that year. And Flower's a pretty quiet guy. Like, you know what I miss about Flower now, Gino? I miss his smile. Like
Yeah.
he's just, he comes into the room and he just has this way of just sort of lighting the room up with, who he is. And I miss that. Like, and Flower didn't sit you down and say, okay, Ryan, listen up. We're going to school now. Here's the 4 things to do to be a professional. And there's a good discussion for you and I to have. I had already scored 38 goals in the NHL. I knew how to play in the NHL, but I didn't really know how to win in the NHL. And those 2 things I found throughout my career are very different. And I say that humbly. I mean, I got to Montreal, and boy, I'm glad I had my eyes open. The way that Bob Gainey approached the game, the way that Larry Robinson prepared for the game, the way that Flower was committed to not only the game but to his fans, right? Like he used to get these. Can you imagine how many hockey cards Guy Lafleur signed in his career?
And he
Like
never said no to anything.
unbelievable.
No.
And Gino never said no. Like he would have bags of cards, bags of mail after most practices at home, and he would sit with his coffee and yes, his cigarette, right, and he'd sign everyone. He didn't hire an AE to come in and copy his signature. And you remember back in the day where you'd lick the envelope.
Yes.
Right. Like I think that was the thing that was the hardest part. Poor Guy. He had to lick all those envelopes.
That's hilarious. So you're in Montreal now. After kind of a rough introduction to the city, there's 1986. The season's going well. The team's kicking butt. There's so much promise for the Habs. I don't want to tell a story. I want you to tell the story. With 3 games left, all of a sudden you're shattered, physically and emotionally. But you do in the end, because you're the public speaker that you are today, you turn it around and it finishes with a good story. Walk our audience through that story.
Yeah, thank you, Gino. It's interesting. I wish I had it for you. We haven't quite finished our next book called Breakout, so that'll be our 6th book. And have no idea why we write books other than Jenny, my wife, is an English major.
And people love reading them. We all love reading them.
Thank you. And this one will be on the 6 mindsets that, pretty much affect everything. So I'll just walk you through a little bit because it tells that story of 86. So with 3 games to go in the season, I break my ankle. And boy, I'm just thinking, I was thinking about this the other day. I was so upset. I was in the greatest pity party of my life because I know the team's on a roll, right? We had been very played poorly in February, March, and had come out of it in April. We're on a great momentum roll, and we're going to do something. And all I can think of, and we call this future negative thinking. all I can think of is I'm going to miss it.
Yeah.
Right. Like I'm a big part of this team. I got a chance to be a big part of the Canadians in the 80s. And I say big part carefully, right? I just played a role that they needed me to play. And here,
we're a big part of it.
Thank you. And here I'm going to miss it. So like I would say, for the first 10 days, especially as the team went through and, beat Boston in the first round, I'm just shaking my head. And you've experienced this and you've been around the game a lot. When you're injured, you're on the outside.
Yeah.
Right. It's not your game. You got to stay out of the way. Yeah. And so I was just, I'm shaking my head. I mean, I'm eating a hot dog at the Montreal Forum, watching the game, and I'm just so upset, angry, PO'd. And then I don't know if this happens. I think it happens to most of us, but I sort of snapped. And I said, okay, hold it here. No more. Done. Right? Come on, Ryan. You're supposed to be a professional. Like, get to work. And I sort of made myself just a little deal. And here was the deal I made myself, that every time my guys would play or practice, so every time they're on the ice, I'd work out.
Wow. Good for you, man. I didn't know that part of the story.
Yeah. And it was just a little deal between me. Right. And so that idea was sort of propelled me and got me back to work. That was the key. It gave me something to do with my time. And I might have been the first NHL player. Or think about it, I've got a cast on my butt, so I can't ride the bike. So I took a bike, put it upside down on the table, and taped it to the table, and I rode with my arms. So, like I looked like Popeye by the time that month and a half was done. And I love telling the story because as I remember it, and you can talk to Eric Lindster about this, but Eric was our orthopedic surgeon, wonderful guy, wonderful doctor. And he had been watching me. And he said, Wally, he said, you're in great shape. He said, we shouldn't do this. It's too early. But do you want to take an x-ray? and I'm going, whoa, you're such a good doctor, right? Like, and he looks at the x-ray and there's a shadow. It looks at me. He's as upset as I am.
Yeah.
And I'm, I've got tears in my eyes. I'm thinking I've worked just to get this chance. Eric says to me, this is how I remember it. Well, he said, I shouldn't do this, but you want to try it? Awesome. And they put some freezing in and Gaetan, taped it up, and it wasn't great, but it wasn't bad. And I got a chance to play the 5 games of the 1986 final against Calgary. And I am so thankful. Like, I think a lot of times, you hear about you hear about Guy Lafleur, you hear about, Gainey and Robinson and all of those guys, but you very seldom hear about the training staffs and the doctors. And those are the guys that really impacted my career and impacted me, in a big way. And that was an example of Eric getting me into the game, right? And
what was after that big huge journey, Ryan? That you thought for sure I'm not going to be a part of this. You felt like an outsider watching this, and all of a sudden you're back. Not only back in, you're contributing. You get to play the last 5 games, and then you take the Stanley Cup. I mean, what is that like at that moment? The sense that holy crap, it really happened.
Yeah, great moment. And I don't know, I was just, it's such a, for me, it was important. It was the cup. It was the Canadian dream. It was all of that. But your point's a good one. It was also, oh my goodness, what a journey in the last month and a half, right? Like it was real. I think the other thing that happened, I'm not sure people know this. You shouldn't know this, but we win the cup in Calgary, Game 5, and so now I don't need my skates sharp because we're done. And so I run out with my skates on the cement, and I go out. And I told my mom and dad. Mom and dad drove in with my two brothers and my sister. They drove in for the game, got them tickets in Calgary. They're from Burnaby, British Columbia, and I so basically with my skates on the cement, I'm running across the cement, and I told them, when we win, be down at this gate, and I'll come get you. So I got a chance to get mom and dad and my two brothers, Brent and George, and my sister Donna into the dressing room. And the reason I tell you that story, Gino, is that when the cup, the cup in the dressing room comes around and everybody gets a chance and you have a drink, of whatever. It's funny because all the guys I didn't drink that much in those days. And all the guys, the biggest question they had is, Wally, when we win the cup, are you going to drink champagne out of it? And I said, yes, absolutely. And, Gino, the cup came to me and it was dry. They drank it all. So
That's
the cup came to me, and what I wanted, and I am so thankful for this, is the cup came to us.
Yeah, as a family.
Right. Because if you think about the sacrifice, how do you become an NHL hockey player in Burnaby, British Columbia? Your mom and dad get up early. They're committed. Yeah. And it was such a great moment, right? And I've got this photo, Jean Perron sort of jumped into the photo. It was awesome. But of my family with the cup, and it was a great moment.
Great moment, great career, 15 long years that you had a chance to play. And I've heard you tell this story before, and I want you to recount this. You're wrapping up your career with Montreal. Pat Burns is the head coach at that point, one of the grumpiest but best coaches of all time. Your ice time is diminishing, and Serge Savard, who we've had on this show, I didn't get him to tell the story because I didn't know this story, but I want you to tell me the story of coffee with the general manager of the Montreal Canadiens, Serge Savard. Tell me about that.
Yeah, this is how I remember that story. Donna, his EA, wonderful lady, gives me a call and says, Ryan, Serge would like to have a coffee with you. So Gino, come on, I should wake up a little bit. I should have a better sense of what's going on here. I'm 9 seasons in to my career in Montreal, and I just have really enjoyed every season. So Serge is such an amazing guy. I just love Serge Savard. And he had really good coffee in his GM room. And so he had a great coffee. Of course, he's got his cigar. And with Serge, it's always small talk. And the thing that Serge does really well, he was probably ahead of his time from a leadership development point of view, is he asks great questions.
Yeah.
Right? Like
he's very pensive, very thoughtful.
Yes.
Very interested.
Yeah, and curious, right? So how's it going, Ryan? This and that. And then as I remember it, he sort of looks at me and he says, Ryan, are you interested in maybe coaching? And in my mind, I'm thinking one day, down the road, and then I said to Serge, I think I can still play, Serge, And then he looks at me, he says, well, have you ever sort of wondered about getting into management? And I'm Gino, I'm still not catching on, right? And then he finally says, would you like to scout? Oh my goodness. Come on, Ryan, wake up. Anyway, I said, Serge, I think I can still play. And he said, where do you want to play?
That's a rough thing to hear, man.
Yeah, it is. But, I should have been ready. And you know what was beautiful about Serge is I had my little sister Donna had gone through a very difficult postpartum depression after her first baby. She was out in the Lower Mainland, British Columbia. And the first thought on my mind, Serge said, "Where do you want to play?" And I said, "Vancouver."
Wow.
You know, I want to go home
I
and
didn't know
help
the story about your sister. That's amazing.
help take care of the family. And, you know, Serge picked up the phone, called Berkey and Pat Quinn. And, you know, I remember saying to Berkey, it was funny. We didn't even negotiate. Berkey said, "I'll give you this much." I said, "Yep, I'm in."
Wow.
And we got a chance to play the last 2 seasons. I didn't play much, but I'm so thankful to the Canucks. They allowed me to get the 1,000 games in. And
Yeah. You
and
got
you
to
know,
be by
my
your
goal,
family.
yeah, and I got a chance to be by the family when we needed to be together.
You had a wonderful career, and but the word that keeps coming through my mind, obviously Stanley Cup champion, but leader, and it wasn't accidental. Like, even in talking to you, it's like every step of the way you're looking for a mentor, you're looking for somebody to learn from. You, in your story about Serge, you were like, I was hearing a very difficult conversation, but I was hearing it and watching the way he was handling it, and you learned from that. And then you're 45 years old, you're in great shape, you got a good thing going, and you go back to school to get your master's in leadership. Where did that come from? Where did that mindset come from? That need to say, there's got to be something else here when this is all done.
Great question, Gino. You know, I love broadcasting. I love being with you guys. I love color. You know, I just did a little bit of color. I mean, my goal was just to try to bring insights to the fans that are watching and that are listening. And I love that. And I think I could have done it for a long time.
Yeah, you were good at it. It came easily
Thank
to
you.
you, and people really respected you for it.
Thank you. And here's what happened. I've got two big issues in my life. Number one is curiosity.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
I'm curious. Like that, like you know, Gina, the question that I sort of wake up with on my brain every day, and this is, I am a weird duck, is why do some teams win and why do some teams lose when they have the same skill? What's the differentiator? And of course, you know, it's leadership.
Yeah.
Right. It's the way the team feels about each other. It's how do you get that in place? Because we don't have perfect players. You're never going to have perfect players. And we're always going to have issues. People are always trying to get the perfect team. The thing I love about people is, you know, you got to work with the people you have.
Yeah.
And so that's leadership, because you've got to think through about being intentional. You know, I think that might be my key word now as Jenny and I do leadership across the world. Got a chance to go into Thailand here in the next little bit and do some leadership development. And I think, you know, that's the key word in 2023, 2024. Leaders are busy. And so if we're not intentional, we can work, but we're not going to win. Right? We've got to be very intentional with the things that we do. So I think that's the first word, is curiosity. Is, you know, I love this industry because I don't know, I should count them up. I think I've read over 40 books this past season. And I say that humbly only because I'm curious.
And you're learning.
And I'm learning. Yeah, and I'm growing. Like, that's what I love about this whole piece of leadership, is it's never done. I did a master's degree and that just whet my appetite. I think the other word, so I'm certainly curious. And I think the other word that hits me, and I'm trying to find this in my life, and I hope I can always try to do this, it is, how do we add maximum value to people?
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's not about Ryan. This life's not about me. Right? This life is, how do you help people? How do you add value to people? And, you know, Jenny and I love writing books, and people often say to me, "Why do you write, Ryan?" And I sort of shake my head, because I'm not that deep. I haven't thought that through yet. But I think here's why I write. I've been thinking about this lately. It's probably for a single mom. Yes, it's for leaders. Yes, it's for high performance. Yes, it's for team. Probably for a single mom who's, you know, struggling, to put things together for her family and just needs in the moment to have some encouragement.
Wow.
Right? Like it's how do you add value to people when they need it? And so those two things sort of come together with what we do these days. And
it blows me away, because week after week we do this show, and to see what guys are doing post careers, the scale is just it just goes like, I've had guys on the show before who are now, Chris Pronger and guys who are making, and Ed Belfour, who are making whiskey products, and guys who are now world travelers, and guys who run travel agencies, and guys and authors like you're one of a number of authors that we've had on the show. It's always amazing to me, and it's always so much fun to catch up, to find out what you guys are doing at this point in your career. It's always great. And I can't tell you how much I've appreciated this time in our conversation. I want to do something with you. I want to play at the end of every one of these shows. We do something called 5 Fast Facts, where I don't want you to think about it too much. Just give me almost like word association. I'll say something, and then you tell me your quick answer on that. Okay? You all set for that?
Good.
All right.
Good to go.
I'm now 5 Fast Facts with Ryan Walter. The best teammate you ever played with?
Best friend, Mike Gartner.
Nice. Gartz is a good guy. We've had him on the show. He was a phenomenal guest. Who was the best coach you ever played for?
Jacques Lemaire.
Yeah. He teaches guys time and time. And we have Brian Rolston, who said by far he was the guy who made his career happen. Who did you hate playing against the most, and why?
Scott Stevens. Scott was an amazing player. He was one of these players, though, that would during in the neutral zone, he'd step up, and I often had my head down.
You paid the price.
I paid the price. So he would be one of them. I mean, we had in our day, we had so many tough guys.
Yeah. Favorite NHL city to play in?
Used to be in the early days was LA, because you got sunshine, right? When I think everybody loved that. But I really enjoyed Chicago. It was my first NHL game on the road in Chicago, in the old building. My first face-off that I took was against Stan Mikita. So I just have great memories.
Yeah. If you hadn't become an NHL player, what career do you think you would have had?
Well, I wondered about being a lawyer, but I don't know. Gino, that's a great question. I think it would have been somewhere where I could have added, maximum value for people.
Yeah, man, you seem like you're happy. You seem like you're enjoying things. You got 5 kids, right? 3 boys and a couple of daughters, and
yep.
I'm just so glad. You look great. You look healthy. I'm so glad you're doing so well, buddy. This has been so much fun catching up with you. Thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Great to be with you.
Over 1,000 games in the NHL, a Stanley Cup with the Montreal Canadiens, one of the great leaders in NHL history, Ryan Walter. The Overtime Podcast is proudly presented by 7-Eleven. Before leaving the rink, order your favorite Slurpee. Fresh, 100% premium Arabica coffee, hot from the oven, pizza and wings, a pint of ice cream, or even a carton of milk, a dozen eggs, and a loaf of bread from the 7NOW app. And Team 7-Eleven is going to have your order ready for pickup 24/7. Hey, if you missed any parts of the show, don't worry. Visit our website at overtimepodcast.ca, where you can both listen and subscribe to future shows. 7-Eleven's Overtime Podcast can be found on the iHeartRadio app, Spotify, iTunes Podcasts, or any of your favorite podcast platforms. Until next week, Canada, I'm Gino Retta saying so long, hockey fans, and thanks for joining us on the 7-Eleven Overtime Podcast.